and it's chapter 28 of the big story, or as they say in France, chapter 28 de la Histoire Grande. Anyway, remember, the point of the big story is this, that as we discover the big narrative, as we discover that there's more going on than just our little bit of it, all the stuff that surrounds our thoughts and takes over our minds today, that we become able to navigate our own chapter in the story more easily. All the decisions that are thrown at us, all the complexities of life, all the forks in the road, we discover we're able to navigate them because it turns out it often isn't the first time something like this has happened. And often we find how we can respond in the bigger story. Which, if the person in today's story had done just that, they wouldn't have got themselves into quite the pickle that they did. We've already met David, the shepherd boy who became the king. And when he started off as king, things were going great. He managed to unite all the tribes of Israel. He brought Jerusalem to become the capital of the nation. He wrote poetry and championed art and wrote these psalms and songs and literature and all this stuff that makes its way into the Bible as a worship tool for all of us still to use. He reigned with peace a lot of the time, but then some of the other times he got bored and he did things which he shouldn't have done. In fact, we learned about him stealing his best mate's wife, Bathsheba, and making her his own wife. And if you thought that was a bad moment in his life, well, it gets worse from there in many ways. At the end of his life, if we fast forward to there, King David hands the crown on to his son, Solomon. Bathsheba was Solomon's mum, and Solomon is going to be the next king of the nation of Israel. And if you thought David did a good job, well, Solomon takes it up to a whole new level. The guy is still renowned now for his wisdom. There's this story, this tale that early on in being a king, when he was still just a teenager, he asks God to give him wisdom. And that wisdom, well, that makes him world famous. He's able to rule in court hearings and proceedings in ways that make people all around sit up and think, oh, I would not have done that. That's incredibly clever and wise. He passes judgment on things. He puts laws into practice. He has new technology. He writes, and like his father wrote poetry, Solomon writes wisdom literature. He writes these pithy little sayings, some of which we've looked at St. Mark's, which help guide through life. He notices things about the ways people act and the habits that they have and the stages of life that people pass through. And he is able to teach people with wisdom about life, about relationships, about the arts, about nature. He is known as a fountain of knowledge and of insight and of wisdom. People come from all over the world to get some of this wisdom. Kings and queens and princes and princesses come and visit him. The Queen of Sheba comes to visit him. And they all ask for knowledge. They all ask for wisdom. They all bring complicated, complex problems to Solomon. And he solves them. He helps them with them. He fixes all these riddles. And in return, they give him stuff. They give him money, they give him gold, they give him silver, they give him horses, they give him chariots, they give him slaves, they give him wives. Solomon, it said, had over 700 wives. He had 4,000 stables in which he kept 12,000 horses just to be on the front end of his chariots. Not the horses that he used for racing or anything like that, just the ones for his chariots and his army. And then, when he was happy with the amount of money that he'd got, when he's content maybe with the amount of gold that he's got, when he's world famous, he thinks to himself, I'm going to build a temple. He notices that throughout the entire history of the people of God, they haven't had a temple. Their God, unlike all the other gods, seems to be everywhere and doesn't seem to want some temple. Whereas all the other people around him, the kings and queens that come from all of the other countries, well, they tell Solomon about the impressive temples that their gods have. So Solomon decides to build God a temple. And as he can do, because he's so rich in fact, that it's said that at the time he turned silver to be just as common as stones around Jerusalem. So rich was he that this temple was going to be knock your socks off fantastic. It was built with stone, this incredible size stones and bricks that were quarried out miles away from the site of the temple. And when they were quarried, they were cut with chisels and hammers into the size and the shape that the stones were needed for the temple. And then they were transported to where the temple was built. Everybody else would have just brought great big chunks of stone from the quarry up to the temple site and chiseled them there. But Solomon wanted the temple site to be built in silence and in reverence and in awe and in a worshipful act. The whole building was like that. So they had a stone outline and foundations and walls for this temple, which then he lined with panels of wood, cedar wood and pine wood. They had to float forests of trees down the coast from Lebanon to get all this wood. I guess it kind of looked a little bit like the inside of a sauna or that door, but all over the place. And then on top of that, Solomon in the inner sanctuary, in the holy bit and in the rooms around that in the temple, he overlaid it with pure gold. Imagine that. What an uncomfortable carpet. You can't sit on that and watch TV. You've got a carpet and wallpaper made of gold. That's just showing off. And then there's all this intricate carvings all over the place. There's these statues of bulls which are life-size and they hold on it, these monumental silver and incredibly precious artifacts that are huge. He has this door which has got these pine leaves and trees carved into it so that when the door shuts, these leaves interlock and they lock the door. It's beautiful, it's intricate, it's impressive, it's spangly, shiny, it's a little bit uncomfortable. But when you walk into it, you could not help but think two things. Firstly, wow, this God's pretty cool. But secondly, and very, very quickly, you would think, wow, Solomon is very, very cool. Look at how rich Solomon is. Look at how important Solomon is. Look at how great at architecture and design Solomon is. Just think about how powerful he must be and how rich and important and prestigious he must be if he can use gold for carpet and wallpaper. We should check out the toilet in case he uses it for toilet paper as well. And that's the problem with this part of the story. Solomon, probably like I would if I'm honest, has believed his own press. He's got caught up with the misunderstanding that the story is about him. He has moved God to the edges, to the periphery of the story, and it's essentially become about him. People come to discover his wisdom. I mean, God gave it to him, but sure, whatever. People come to discover his wealth. I mean, God gave it to him, but sure, whatever. People think that he is impressive. I mean, sure, God made him the king, but whatever. And in a culture, in a society, in a place where everything becomes about celebrity and wealth and status and prestige and the number of followers you have and just how much stuff you have, well, in one of those cultures, you need the prophets to step up. Somebody has to shout from the sidelines that this gold stuff is not what God ever wanted. What he wants is for the outcast to be looked after. What he wants is for the hungry to be fed, for the lonely to be sat with and welcomed to the table, for the naked to be clothed, for those who are running from their home for their lives to be welcomed into family. That's what he wants. And so the prophets who care about justice and righteousness and peace, well, they're going to have to shout louder. And if it means setting fire to stuff on the top of a tall mountain whilst being chased by a despot murderous queen, well, so be it. But that's next week.